QSO Today, episode 194, Ryhor, Greg, Harbacheuski W3NW. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM, bringing the finest state-of-the-art ham radio transceivers for the love of ham radio, and by Soda Beam's high-quality amateur radio accessories for the great outdoors. Please support the QSO Today podcast by supporting these fine sponsors. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. We return to the United States this week to Las Vegas, Nevada, for a QSO with Ryhor, Greg Harbacheuski W3NW, who began his ham radio career in Belarus, a former republic of the former Soviet Union. Having grown up during the Cold War with the impressions of the Soviet Union, it was not clear to me that ham radio flourished there during that period. And from Greg's story, it appears that ham radio was popular there, and kids entered it the same way that they did here. So Greg's story will sound familiar. Greg's story is also an immigrant story where he came to the United States to pursue his career in medicine, while at the same time he pursues his ham radio activities in his off-work hours. W3NW is my QSO today. W3NW, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Greg?
Yes, I'm here, Eric. You're 5'9" here in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Well, that's terrific. Greg, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
All right. Well, I grew up in former Soviet Union in Republic of Belarus, and when I was in high school, actually even before that, when I was, I think in my second grade, I went to one of the small local clubs, which really had nothing to do with ham radio, but it was teaching kids electronics. And from that point, I started reading. I came across ham radio. So then I got really interested in that, and then I joined another club, which was a ham radio station, and that's when it started. So I think by the time I got my first call sign, I was already in junior high school. I was, I think, about 14-year-old.
Well, you know, many of us who grew up in the during the Cold War in America, when we thought of the former Soviet Union, and this is, you know, pre-1989, when the Berlin Wall came down,
correct.
We wouldn't think very much that ham radio would even be allowed in the Soviet Union. How popular was ham radio in those days?
Yeah, you're correct. I don't think it was kind of actively popularized by anybody, simply because, you're right, those were times of Iron Curtain between East and West. But somehow it was not officially forbidden. So it kind of existed, but not really widely advertised. It was kind of hard to get equipment for ham radio operation. It was even hard to get parts to build this equipment. So it was kind of, it definitely was there, but it was not widely popular.
But the communications ministry of the former Soviet Union was still issuing ham radio licenses. Did you?
Yeah.
And how was that ham radio license structure set up in those days? Was there more than one level, or was there only one license?
There was. Yeah, they were issuing licenses. It would take quite a long time. I think when I applied, I had to wait probably around 9 or 10 months just to get my kind of entry level license. So at that point, they had 4 different levels. So, and you kind of had to go from the lowest level to make your way up to the highest level. So my class license was, I guess you can call it class number 4, and only 160 meters was allowed with output up to 5 watt. So that was my entry license. My first call sign was UC2OFJ. So that was my first call sign, and again, I was only allowed to work on 160 meters with up to 5 watt output.
Okay, well that was pretty challenging. It seems to me. So what did you do on 160 meters with 5 watts? Were you able to get out of Belarus?
Yeah, I was able somehow I was fairly bold as far as setting up my station. I used to live in a 9-store building, and right next to my building, we have 2 more 5-store buildings. So I was on the 3rd floor, and directly from my balcony, I actually put a full-size Delta loop for 160 meters without asking any kind of permission or anything like that. So now I'm thinking that was awesome antenna, actually. It was kind of low, but still it was working well. It was working well on 160 meters. And then somehow it was way more activity, at least in that part of the world when I was growing up. It was actually quite an active band at that time. I don't think many people were compliant with this 5-watt restriction. So at least I could hear a lot of people pretty easily. And once in a while, let's say in the middle of the night, I was able to go probably around maybe 1,500 kilometers, not on a regular basis, but once in a while I was able to make contacts this far.
And this was using CW?
I was using both. My first rig was actually, I built it myself. It was a single band direct conversion transceiver, and it was giving out about, I guess, 5-watt, maybe 4-watt, something like that. And at that time, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I was mostly using a single sideband initially. So that was actually a single sideband. So later on, I acquired one of the older Soviet military receivers. I did some modifications. I got a VF4 signal out from that receiver, and I built up a separate device which effectively turned that receiver into a transceiver. And that was my CW rig. By that point, I got upgraded to level 3, which allowed me to go above 160 meters. And then I started working actively on 80 meters using the same antenna and roughly the same 5 or 10 watt power.
Also single sideband mostly?
No, at that point I actually switched. Even when I went to 3rd class, I was still allowed to use single sideband, I believe only on 160 meters and 10 meters. So that's what I could use. So I was allowed to work on 80 meters, but only using CW, and that became my primary mode, which of course helped me to increase my skills as far as CW operator.
Now, as a new ham and a relatively young ham, you built your own single-band direct conversion receiver for 160 meters. Did you have Elmers or other mentors that helped you?
Not so much, to be honest. Like I said, I did go on regular basis to that club, but guys up there were mostly interested in contesting. So I was pretty much on my own for the most part. So I would read some magazines we had. We actually still, I believe, have it. This magazine is called Radio, and they had a couple of pages in every issue dedicated to ham radio. So, and then it was kind of hard. The economy back then was not really market-based or anything like that, so everything was just difficult to get as far as parts and as far as literature. So it was a bit of a difficult times. My cousin, who at that time lived in Ukraine, somehow he also got interested in ham radio. So every summer we would get together for a month or two, and then those were really kind of a mecca for us as far as building stuff and exchanging parts, information, books, and things like that. So, but really I didn't have any kind of a person that I could call Elmer at this point.
But your first receiver, where did you get the schematic for that? I mean, and the parts, if you, in Belarus, where did you find parts? Did you have to scrounge them out of chassis of other electronic devices?
Yeah, mostly junkyard, and sometimes lunch money would be very useful. So you can buy parts from other people, and you would exchange with some other guys as well. So it was a long process before I got enough parts, and sometimes you would have to come up with replacements. So it was just a little bit from every possible source, but mostly it's kind of a junkyard, maybe dumpster sometimes. I think my family used to have an old receiver which I cannibalized at some point, so some of the parts came from that device. Some of the parts I would get from guys from Radio Club. So it was quite challenging. It was completely different compared to, for instance, buying his kit and having everything that you need in one package. So, and they also had stores that they would sell parts, but they would have some kind of weird selection, just random transistors and resistors, and you would really have to get those bits and pieces from different sources. So,
was there a gray market for parts?
Not so much. I mean, there was a bit of a market of parts for repairing TV sets, and we had dedicated TV repair shops. So some of the parts, I guess, you can get from that, but really not much. Really not much.
When you Google Ryhor Harbacheuski W3NW, you get hundreds of references to your medical practice. How did you end up coming to the United States and choosing the profession that you are in?
Well, initially, right, I know that you ask this question, your interviewees, pretty often as far as influence of the ham radio hobby to their career, and that was, in fact, the case for me. So I did go initially, and I studied applied physics in the university back in my home country in Belarus. But then when I was a third-year physics student, I decided to switch to medicine completely, and I still don't know exactly how that
happened.
It just suddenly I just woke up one day and I felt, that's what I should do, and then I switched to medical school. So I graduated from medical school. At that time, it was 6 years, and then at some point, I guess pretty much similar way how I decided to switch to medicine, I decided to try to go to the United States. It was probably related to Gorbachev's era, perestroika, and just because I suddenly realized that I could do it, I just decided to give it a try. And of course, initially, I never committed saying to myself, oh yeah, now I'm going to leave Belarus completely and move permanently. I just, like a lot of people, came for what I thought was going to be maybe a couple of months, a couple of years, and then I, of course, ended up staying. So I came to this country in about 2003, and then I went through some hassles related to confirming my medical degree, and then I went back to medical practice in this country.
Right, and now you're in Las Vegas, Nevada, and you're an orthopedic surgeon. Is that right?
Yeah. I work for a local VA hospital. I help veterans with some orthopedic issues. So that's my job at this point.
And you publish widely.
I publish quite a bit in medical field. I'm also associate professor in University of Nevada Medical School as well. So I teach in residency program. So that's my level at this point.
Were you active in ham radio all the way through medical school and residencies and coming over here?
Not really. I think that's not uncommon for us, and I think that's probably the case for you as well, Eric. I did have this hiatus. After I graduated from high school, I got into computers. I built my own personal computer at that time, so ham radio went kind of into this dormancy for some time, and I only came back to ham radio, I think it was around 2009 or 2010 already in this country, and that's when I went through my United States ham radio license and exams, and I got my current call sign.
Well, when I got back into it, it was like Rip Van Winkle, opening your eyes and all of a sudden just finding a completely different ham radio. Is that what you also found here?
Yeah, that was very similar to what your experience has been. I again had to work on my CW skills, for instance, because we forget things pretty quickly, apparently. So, of course, it was not as difficult as learning CW from scratch, but I did have to go through some learning curve. And then you're absolutely right. The ham radio is very different from what it was 20, 25 years ago. But I guess that's what keeps our interest. So it's always learning something and, again, having access to parts which I didn't have almost at all when I was growing up in Soviet Union. So that what probably made me to come back, and that's what keeps me going at this point.
Have you been back to the Soviet, back to Russia and to Belarus since you left? And have you had a chance to kind of look at ham radio there, and has it changed much?
I do go back routinely. I still have family living in Belarus and in Ukraine, so I go there pretty much every year. And my wife, she also has family back there. But to be honest, I never connected back to ham radio in Belarus. Somehow in Belarus, as opposed to Russia, it doesn't seem to be all that active, at least in that city that I used to live. Last summer I was there, and I went to a radio club, which I used to attend when I was younger, and it was really, it was actually impossible to find somebody. The antenna was down, so for whatever reason in that particular location, it's not active. But then if you look online, they have a few Russia-based very active ham radio websites where a lot of things going on, and that kind of encouraging.
Now, I saw, as part of my research, that you're living in a homeowners association neighborhood in Las Vegas, where I didn't see any antennas on any of the roofs. Are you operating from your home in Las Vegas? And if you are, what kind of antenna are you using?
One of my friends here, Rob Purcell, N7REP, he actually suggested this antenna design that I'm currently using. It's just a simple delta loop for 40 meters. It's in rectangular shape. So basically, it's coming from under my roof down to fence of my lot. And there is definitely enough space for full-size 40-meter delta loop. It's tilted towards the northwest, I guess mostly towards north. And it's fairly quiet, and it's fairly effective on transmit as well. So I actually, before I put this antenna up, I never could imagine that I was going to be able to set up an antenna which effective and allows me to operate. But I do also go and do quite a bit of portable operation. I have this wonderful KX3 radio with these tuners that can tune pretty much anything, and that's another option for me at this time. But this antenna works real well, surprisingly. So I didn't have to come up with any kind of attic dipoles or magnetic loops. I was actually able to put fairly stealthy 40-meter full-size delta loop, and it's just great. Of course, it doesn't work on 80 meters and 160 meters, but all of the other bands from 40 meters up, even 6 meters, it tunes pretty well. Of course, 6 meters is a different story. It's rarely active, especially at this time of the year. But 40 meters, 20 meters, it's just absolutely great.
Well, that's amazing. And you're using a polar route to Europe, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, every time I have a QSO with somebody in Europe, I try to look up on the map, and that's probably the shortest path to Europe. So I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. But I remember during summer I also had a few contacts with New Zealand and Australia. So for whatever reason, it worked. So.
Let's take this quick break about ICOM and its amazing line of state-of-the-art amateur radio transceivers. The Dayton Hamvention in Xenia, Ohio, is less than a month away. ICOM is preparing to bring their complete line of products, including the new IC7610 HF and 50 MHz all-mode transceiver with dual receivers, as well as the amazing and affordable IC7300, a new paradigm for an entry-level HF rig. Both rigs have raised the bar for outstanding performance and operating pleasure of rigs that cost twice as much. Of course, they will bring their complete line of VHF and UHF mobile transceivers and handhelds, including the updated ID31A Plus and the ID51A Plus 2, to work both D-Star and FM in a single unit. If you're working ARES and emergency services, be sure to check out the mobile radios, including the ID5100A, the ID4100A, the IC2730A, and the IC2300H transceivers. So while this may be a lot to remember, it is all made easier if you visit the ICOM booth in Building 2, Booth 2508, at the Dayton Hamvention. ICOM has donated a number of their rigs and swag for drawings both Friday and Saturday, so be sure to stop by the booth to register. And when you do, be sure to tell them that you heard it here on the QSO Today podcast. ICOM, for the love of amateur radio. And now back to my QSO Today. What's the main rig?
I have quite a few rigs at this point. I have a KX3 with span adapter, so that is really convenient. Then I have a couple of homebrew rigs. A few months ago I built QCX kit from QRP Labs for 20 meters. So that's just absolutely great radio, just extremely low noise. Somehow it gives, I think in my case, it's 3 or 4 watt, just with 3 MOSFET as finals without any radiator. That's just very nice design. So I use this once in a while. I also have a K2, and I also have a rig, I think it's called One Water. I built it from kitsandparts.com, and I built it for 40 meters, which is very simple design. I think it's similar to NorCal 40. It's just 2 NE602 for the mixer and for the detector, and it's also very quiet and nice radio. It's kind of way more fun to use those homebrew rigs even comparing to KX3. And I have a couple of bigger radios. I have Tentec Orion, and I do have Kenwood 590, but they both in the storage, and I just rarely go to those rigs. So that's what I have right now.
Well, when Rob Purcell sent me the email saying that I should have you on, he said he's a surgeon by day and he melts solder by night, which means you spend an awful lot of time at your workbench when you're not being a doctor. Now, you just mentioned that the QCX, but I also saw on a forum that you've actually been very busy with the BitX. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I had both BitXs. I have BitX 40 and I have Micro BitX. So I have both of them, and they both really nice rigs. But CW operation probably a little bit harder on those rigs. I kind of like to have full QSK, and I like to be able to listen in between dits and dots. So I do have both of them built. They both in enclosures and everything, and I think I even did some mods for them. But again, those kits, they're really nice and easy for somebody to build, but it's not much soldering involved in that. So because you already get pre-built boards, so a little bit less excitement with those rigs, so to speak.
Well, I saw in one of the pictures of the QCX where you had actually mounted it in a QRP Labs box with some modification. The QCX rig was sitting on top of Experimental Methods in RF Design by Wes Hayward and Rick Campbell. So therefore, it seems to me that if you've got a book like that, you might also be doing some of your own home brewing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind building things from scratch, and I like kits. Kits are kind of nice because then you can build something fairly quick, and you oftentimes don't have to worry about issues because somebody else already did some troubleshooting at the design stage. But sometimes I do build things from scratch. For instance, right now I'm restoring one of the older Russian radios, and I'm trying to maintain the structure of this receiver, but I'm trying to use modern parts, hoping to get a little bit better result as far as sensitivity, noise level, and so on. So that rig is actually based on dual gate MOSFETs. So that stuff is actually going from scratch. So I don't mind doing kits. I don't mind building from scratch. It's all interesting to me for sure.
Do you have test equipment on your bench?
Yeah, Rob and 7REP, he actually gave me his nice Tektronix scope up to 100 megahertz. I have a signal generator. Then I do have a Chinese vector network analyzer, which actually works surprisingly very well, and it's really instrumental when you tune band pass filters or low pass filters or crystal filters. And I think that's it. And of course, I have a couple of regular current and voltage meters and resistance meters, kind of basic. But as far as RF equipment, that's what I have: signal generator, scope, and this analyzer.
Are you doing any work with microprocessors with like the Arduino for your projects?
I'm trying to be honest. I guess I'm in kind of embryonic stages when it comes to microprocessors. My cousin, Dmitry, the one that we spent some time together when we were younger, he lives in Ireland right now. So he's actually visiting me right now. So he is a guy who really helps me a lot with microprocessor programming. So he actually came to visit me a couple of days ago, and he's right now with me. So he brought a power amplifier from Flex Radio, and right now he is helping to attach one of the Discovery microprocessor boards. I believe it's SMT32. So we're kind of trying together to build a little control board for that amplifier to switch bands and to monitor SWR. He's way better with microprocessors. So his call sign is EI3JQ, and Dmitry is his name. So, of course, I use those microprocessors as part of BTEX and microBTEX, and I did upload some software, but that was written by somebody else. I'm not I'm not that good yet.
So you're not recoding your QCX?
Well, it's not an open source, so I guess even if I could, I probably won't be able to easily. And I mean, to be honest, what Hans Sommer did, that's just great. I don't think there is any, there's a lot of reason for anybody to change that. That's just an absolutely amazing little rig. So that's what's going on as far as microprocessors. I kind of enjoy a little bit more melting solder and even some mechanical work, building chassis, and that type of work is actually I enjoy a little bit more than, for instance, programming.
Do you have a machine shop for making chassis and stuff? Do you have a place where you go where you can bend metal and drill holes?
No, I mean I don't have anything of that. I just use simple, hand drill and a whole bunch of drill bits. So even if I need to make a round hole for, let's say, LCD screen, I would just use this drill. Then I file to make it perfectly nice and rectangular. I don't mind doing that without any kind of special equipment. And as far as enclosures, these days you can fairly easily buy things off eBay or some other websites, and then you just basically drill holes for your sockets and other things that you need. Typically, you don't need a whole lot of equipment unless you want to do something special, let's say something tube-based and things like that, but I haven't gotten that far yet, so we'll see.
So you mentioned that you're using the KX3 with the PAN adapter on your desk. So you're operating QRP, or did you buy the amplifier as well?
Well, that amplifier that I'm working with my cousin right now, that will give me up to 100 watt. But these days, with all of the firmware modification that Elecraft issued for KX3, you can actually get up to 15 watt from KX3. And to be honest, again, I don't complain about my antenna at all, and it's quite a bit. 15 watt for CW, it's not bad at all. So it's not technically QRP anymore, but it's definitely enough power, and you definitely enjoy more making contacts with this power as opposed to 100 watt or something like that.
Right, especially if you're using an antenna tuner close to the rig. You don't have all that RF in the shack.
Correct. Yeah, that's great, and you're absolutely correct. This is just another advantage of QRP and not having 1500 watt, especially if you're located close to your antenna. So, but this antenna, it tunes real well. It has very reasonable SWR for 7 meters, 20 meters, 15 and 10 meters, and like I said, even 6 meters. It's a bit difficult, a bit harder to tune for 17 meters and 12 meters. So I guess RFI level on those bands will be higher, but the rest of the bands are fine.
Are you having any problems in your neighborhood with noise from LEDs, street lighting, things like that?
Yeah, definitely. If you compare a noise level in the middle of the day versus middle of the night, there's a huge difference. So I never try to identify any distinct sources of noise. I just assume that it's probably going to be from all directions, just because it's fairly densely populated area where I live. So, but there is some, and that's the reason why I started doing portable operation, and it's amazing. You can just drive outside of city limits just maybe 45 minutes, and it's just absolutely quiet. Sometimes you turn your rig and you think your receiver is broken. That's how little noise you can hear from the headphones, but it makes huge difference. It's absolutely huge difference. We have a nice mountain Charleston here close to Las Vegas, and oftentimes I go there and it gives you a couple of advantages. Number one is low noise level, and secondly, you can get up to, I think, 8,000 feet elevation, which gives you advantage as far as propagation.
There's a national park or something up there?
Yeah, we have a couple of national parks. We have Valley of Fire. There is a Red Canyon, which is a couple of hours from Las Vegas. But I personally like Mountain Charleston just because it's fairly close and it's really nice high elevation. So it just, even with small power and not perfect antenna, you can still have nice contacts, and it's just great. So that's my preferred place to go for portable operation, Mountain Charleston. And
what kind of antenna do you take with that?
I have a tripod, and I have this MFJ telescopic whip. I think it's probably about 2.5 meters long. But again, this Magic KX3 tuner, it just tunes pretty much everything you connect to this little radio. I have a few counterposes, and it tunes well. It tunes well 20 meters, 17 meters, and even 40 meters. With such a short whip, you can still get it nicely tuned. I'm not sure how effective this antenna is, but it definitely allows you to make some nice contacts for sure.
Now, you say you work at the VA hospital in Las Vegas. Is there an amateur radio station or Mars station at the VA hospital? And is there an opportunity to bring amateur radio to your patients?
We don't have a station at the hospital. I'm not sure if that will be even allowed by federal government. To be honest, I never looked into that, but I do meet quite a few ham radio operators among my patients, so it's kind of interesting. Sometimes it will come up during conversation, and it helps. I do meet quite a few ham radio operators.
And now this message from Soda Beams. If you've been taking your Yaesu FT817 into the wild to work SOTA, or Rapid Deployment Amateur Radio, called radar, then you may have been caught in the rain a few times. Soda Beams offers a new replacement speaker for the Yaesu FT817 that replaces the cheap paper cone speaker that was the standard feature of the 817. The new replacement speaker has a mylar cone that is immune to water damage, and while Richard at Soda Beams does not recommend operating the 817 in the rain, at least with the new Soda Beams replacement speaker, you will have a radio that is now louder, clearer, and brighter than ever before. Richard says that this is a quick and easy upgrade. So whether your needs is for the Yaesu FT817 replacement speaker or any other part, antenna, or device to make your outdoor operating more enjoyable, be sure to go to SodaBeams by clicking the link on this episode's show notes page. Keep in mind that if you use the coupon code QSO Today, one word QSO Today at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your purchases through the end of 2018. SodaBeams, amateur radio for the great outdoors. And now back to our QSO Today. Do you have children that are interested in ham radio?
I have a son, and he's 17-year-old. He's going to be actually 18 in September. But like a lot of your guests, somehow our children not always share our interest towards ham radio. So he's a little bit of a millennial generation type of kid. So he likes computers in general, but I don't think he really understands all of the advantages of ham radio as opposed to internet and cell phones. So he's not into ham radio.
So he doesn't accompany you to Mount Charleston to watch you operate DX from a piece of wire and the little radio?
No, he did it once or twice earlier. At that point, we lived in Kentucky, and he did go with me once or twice, but I guess it wasn't all that interesting for him, so he just preferred doing something else. Let me think for a sec.
You mentioned that you've worked on chassis, that you use simple hand tools to build chassis for radios. What have you built where you've actually done the metal work and you've created something?
When I was putting together BTEX 40 first, I bought an, I guess I can call it blank enclosure, and I had to made all of the front panel holes for all of the switches and LCD display, and I had to drill back panel as well. And then I did the same thing when I was building microBTEX as well. I got just a blank enclosure with no holes from eBay, and I had to do all of those. I had to mount all of the connectors and switches and variables resistors for that as well.
So you use round drills to make a bunch of pilot holes in order to create square cutouts for the display and some of the connectors on the back?
Yeah, I just use regular drill bit, let's say, for instance, 2-3 millimeters in diameter drill bits. And so I basically make a row of holes, and then I remove piece in the middle, and then I just use file to make it nice and straight and proper dimensions. So I mean, that's I guess
clever.
That's how I. Yeah, it's just I'm sure there are better tools, and you can come up with probably a relatively inexpensive way to get it done quicker. But that's how I was doing it when I was younger, and
that works.
Right, and like I said, I don't mind spending a little bit of extra time by doing that. It's really about process, not really about some kind of a distinct final goal. I'm sure you feel the same way when you homebrew your radios.
Yeah, it's the process. It's all of a sudden lose hours of time if you get in the right frame of mind while you're working.
Yeah, so-called flow state, correct?
The flow state. Are you a practitioner of the flow state?
I think somebody mentioned on your podcast, and that was, I believe, in reference to contesting, right?
Yeah, it's been mentioned a number of times, but yeah, mostly contesters seem to go into or could go into the flow state where they make thousands of contacts, and it seems like it only happened in about 30 minutes.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really the case, not only for contesting, but I think when we get excited about building something, we can also, you're absolutely correct, we can spend a lot of time and not noticing how much time. But I think it's nice. It's definitely therapeutic. It helps us to cope with all kind of stress and difficulties in life, and it just the way how it works for us. So I agree with you.
Well, it seems to me that you've also chosen a profession that where you might have the opportunity when you're doing orthopedic surgery. It seems to me you could spend hours in the operating room building and reconstructing Do you go into the flow state in the operating room?
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, I like orthopedics because it's a nice combination of being able to use your hands, building something like you said, reconstructing, but at the same time, it's also highly intelligent. You have to use your mind quite a bit as far as, for instance, preoperative planning. And then in the operating room, I agree with you. It's definitely a flow state, and you can spend. I mean, obviously, there are some limitations when you operate. You don't want to spend 8 hours and jeopardize your outcome just by duration of the surgery. But sometimes it's necessary to spend extra time in order to get better result for the patient, for sure.
Can I ask you what your specialty is? Do you like hips, knees?
I've done quite a bit of everything. Right now in the VA hospital, I mostly focus on hip and knee replacement. Before this place, I spent 3 hours I spent 3 years in East Kentucky, and at that time I was mostly dealing with fractures. I fixed a lot of fractures as a result of car accidents and ATV accident, all kind of different injuries. So, but right now it's mostly hip and knee replacement.
Well, it seems like there's a tremendous synergy between what you do professionally, repair and restoration of human beings, and repair and restoration and building of electronic devices. It seems to me that they kind of go hand in hand.
I think so. When I was in medical school, I suddenly realized that I really have this passion for orthopedic surgery specifically. For instance, I wasn't interested that much in, let's say, urology or general surgery. Somehow I just felt that orthopedics is what interests me the most. And like we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of similarities. It's something to do with your hands at the same time. It's also highly intelligent type of work. And I think that applies both to ham radio, at least to what I do, mostly ham brewing, of course, and the same applies to some areas in medicine for sure.
Does your wife enjoy your ham radio hobby?
She doesn't mind. I think she really appreciates this therapeutic effect of ham radio. So she probably notices that I can get some rest and I get a bit more relaxed after I spend some time with ham radio. I think that's and for her that's probably a bigger benefit than having to deal with all of the negative parts of it.
I see. So it gives you a chance to decompress before you. Yeah.
I think that's really the main thing. That's really because you experience moving to a different country. I'm sure your time in Jerusalem was not always easy, and it's a lot of stress, a lot of differences, and it takes toll on you. And then having something to decompress, it's absolutely great. It's absolutely great.
Well,
I think it's more than.
Is there something in ham radio that you'd really love to do that you're not doing now? I mean, do you have your eye on some ham radio future technology or operation that intrigues you, that you think that you'll pursue at some point in the future?
I am thinking a little bit about some digital modes, and especially the newer ones that allow a really high efficiency with relatively low power. I know that a lot of people are interested in Whisper, for instance, and that just amazes how effective it can be even these days with this high noise environment. So that's something to consider. But overall, like a lot of people say, a lot of people believe that it's really the best time for us to be involved in ham radio because we have access to components, but I think most importantly to information that's shared widely, and so that helps tremendously. And again, we do have companies that offer amazing kits for us to build. So it's hard. Sometimes I believe having too many options maybe. I wouldn't say too much, but sometimes when you struggle to get something, it makes your final result more rewarding.
Yeah, right, because oftentimes the journey is the best part of it, and getting to the destination is you just want to go out on the journey again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when journey is too short, so that may be considered as a bit of a disadvantage. So, but to answer your question, I think these days we have access to pretty much everything we want, at least in this part of the world. And that's great, but again, we just have to be careful.
Well, I made a reference to this in the letter that I sent out this last week about the fact that what amazes me about doing these interviews is that I am interviewing a lot of people who are retired, and in the past, when you were retired, you were kind of put out to pasture. But the Internet has made it possible for retired hams to continue to innovate and share. I'm amazed at how quickly ham radio is evolving from year to year, just based on this ability to share all this information.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree 100%. It definitely keeps us younger, for sure. You mentioned about retirees, and I think all this new knowledge and all those things that we learn, that definitely keeps us younger as far as mentally, and even motor skill, dexterity. That's just tremendous help for all of us to maintain over the years.
Right. I think it gives us all a purpose beyond when you're finally retired. I'm not there yet, although sometimes I think it'd be great to be retired. But it seems to me that that when you're retired from work and you have this purpose, that purpose can drive you for 30, 40 years.
Right. Yeah. That's pretty much what I felt when I came back to ham radio after my hiatus. I suddenly started seeing again this hobby from new perspective and getting involved again, relearning Morse code, and then relearning modern level of equipment that we can use. That definitely helped. And that's just and I hope just keep on going.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
I think it's really those endless possibilities for us. You interview so many different people, and everybody finds something special for himself. You had a lot of high achievers, contesters as your guest, and those people, they just achieved so much. They just made those thousand and thousand contacts, and that's what makes them happy. So we have ham brewers such as, for instance, myself. We have people who enjoy digital modes. We have people who develop in other things, and I think those endless possibilities are just really great.
So do you have advice that you'd give then to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Well, they need to listen to QSO Today podcast, that's for sure. So that would be good advice. And seriously, you do get quite a few different people, so just getting all this information gives you basically really deep understanding, big picture of what's going on, and then you just pick what you like and go ahead, and I think that's just way to go.
How do you listen to the QSO Today podcast?
I typically listen using my iPhone. Sometimes I listen when I drive to work. I have about 20-minute drive. Sometimes right before I go to bed or before I fall asleep, I would listen. So that's how I listen to QSO Today.
Greg, if the listeners want to reach you and reach out to you, what's the best way? Do you have any channels?
Probably the best way is to use my email account. So if you like, you can share. I really have no problem with that. So you can put.
I'll put it in the show notes, but I'll put it in such a way that it can't be picked up.
Right. By those scamming machines.
The scamming machines that figure out how to read email and send you 1,000 new messages.
Right.
Greg, it was really a pleasure to have you on the QSO Today podcast. The story is intriguing. The fact that you've been so successful in the United States professionally is wonderful, and the fact that you're back doing ham radio and contributing is also an amazing thing. So with that, I want to wish you 73, and thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast.
Thank you very much, Eric, and 73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Ryhor. or Greg, be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W3NW in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America for becoming a key sponsor. I also want to thank SodaBeans for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please use the links on the show notes pages. Please be sure to show your support of these fine sponsors by using the links provided on the QSO Today website. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the previous episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. Also, if you have suggestions for guests, please send those to me as well. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio and the iTunes Store, and now a host of podcast services and applications. I have put links to all of these services on the QSO Today website. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.